Fatal Fury First Contact. Or is it Fatal Fury F Contact? Who knows? Who cares? Anyways, this Neo Geo Pocket Color release from 1999 is a miniaturized version of the real bout Fatal Fury 2 game that was a big deal in arcades for some reason. I guess most of these Neo Geo games were big deals back in the day, but I digress. Anyways, the game gives you 11 fighters to choose from at first, an assortment of familiar characters from the Fatal Fury series, including your series staples. Each fighter has their usual assortments of special moves, super moves that can be executed when your meter is full, and your super duper moves that can be performed when your meter is full while the life meter is in red. You can also taunt, dash forward and backwards. Your typical fighting game standard fare, I guess. There are two modes of play, the single player mode and the versus mode, which requires a second player to play, hence you only have one mode of play in Fatal Fury whatever for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. In the single player mode, you pick a character and you fight your way through 8 opponents. Most of your opponents are randomized with the exception of the first battle, which you get to choose your opponent at first, as well as the fourth battle, which is always going to be against Billy Kane, and stage 8 will always be a battle against either of the two designated bosses, Geese Howard or Wolfgang Krauser, well, whatever. Normally, defeating this final opponent will net you a fairly simplistic ending sequence along with the credits, but if you perform well enough, you'll take on a secret fighter named Alfred, who was so amazed by your fighting prowess he crashed his plane or something. Anyways, you defeat him and he becomes a playable 12th character. There's also an additional fighter that's only playable in the Versus mode, which requires a game link as well as a second person with a second Neo Geo Pocket Color, as well as a second copy of the game to play. You could perhaps see the dilemma here. Fatal Fury's only outing onto the Neo Geo Pocket Color, not counting the various crossover fighters such as King of Fighters or the SNK vs Capcom fighting game, is a rather solid fighter on its own merits. Although it lacks the plane switching mechanic that has been something of a Fatal Fury staple, what you do have here is enough to get the job done. You have 2 buttons for punch and kick respectively, you have your usual assortment of special moves, a super and power move that can be performed under the right conditions. There's also dashing, taunting, a couple other technical bits that pop up, but on a whole, it's a fairly basic but otherwise pretty solid little fighting game. The speed might not be as fast-paced as one would like, but at the very least control is pretty solid, responsive, and special moves are executed without much trouble if you know the inputs. Some of the more complex command inputs for these moves have been somewhat simplified, nothing too overly taxing to pull off, but regardless the response time is adequate, everything executes rather fluidly, the gameplay itself is entirely functional and quite enjoyable despite the somewhat simplified setup. Like most SNK fighting games, if you lose a fight and you have to continue, you have the option to handicap the computer to make life easier if you so choose, and in a bit of a nice feature, the game saves your progress so that if you dive into the options, you could pick a starting stage up to the last stage you've conquered, which is a nice little touch for those on the go. A lot of these SNK developed fighters, when they make the transition to the portable format, whether it be on the Game Boy or in this case the Neo Geo Pocket Color, the graphics are drastically altered so that they all assume a deformed, chipified style, and this Fatal Fury game is no exception. Apparently some of the fighters that you see here grace the other Neo Geo Pocket games of this genre. Unfortunately, they look alright, almost kind of huggable with their big heads and really small bodies. The backdrops look nice, the in-between stuff is pretty decent, and even on the non-backlit Neo Geo Pocket Color display, it's a clear enough presentation that's easy to make out, and that's all you could really ask for. There's also some good quality sound in this Fatal Fury game for Neo Geo Pocket Color, adaptations of the musical bits from the real bout game this is based on, and some familiar Fatal Fury themes that have been around since the dawn of time. And they sound perfectly fine for the hardware that it's on. And while there are no voice bites in this game, you do have some decent quality sound effects that become a source of mild amusement whenever I hear these people taunt in this format. Overall, Fatal Fury First F whatever Contact for the Neo Geo Pocket Color is a fun little fighter that's functional at worst and enjoyable at best. It's good. It's good. 12 characters in the single player mode might not be the most inspiring in terms of replay value, that is unless you find someone with similar hardware, but it's a perfectly acceptable little fighting game. It controls well, it plays well, looks perfectly fine, sounds good. What else can I say other than this is pretty good stuff, really. No complaints. I had fun. That's all that matters. And I know it's hard to make out on the tiny display, but for those who care, yes, They bounce. They bounce fine. Yeah, next.